Everybody. Welcome back to TMR's Master Advisor. Today is February 9th. This is Master Advisor number 66. We're going to be talking about expedition cruising today, and we really have a great guest who I'm very excited to talk to. But first, I want to make some announcements, and we do have a sponsor we want to introduce too. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we go ahead, for those of you who are new here, you'll have the best viewing experience today if you switch into speaker view on Zoom, and it should be top right. You have gallery view or speaker view. Speaker view is going to be the best way to watch today's session. And then also the chat on the bottom is open if you want to open it up. For those who want to communicate with us today, please don't be shy. We're going to grab questions as we go along. So anything relevant, any comments, questions, concerns, go ahead and drop them in there. And we'll do our best to sort of incorporate them into this conversation over the next 45 minutes or so. I also want to thank everyone for coming out 2 weeks ago for episode number 65 when we spoke about dealing with a client's travel disruptions. I know that was super relevant. We really had a good, comprehensive discussion. It was one of my favorite sessions. We've done 2 really great sessions this year, and that was one of them. And the other one was the definition of new luxury travel. We're going to link that to the chat now if you want to watch any of our past sessions, any of our sessions coming up. If you want to rewatch this session, they'll all be on our YouTube page. This one will be on there later today. So if you want to go on there, if you like the content, please subscribe to the channel. That always helps us grow this community and brings you these regular series every couple of weeks or so. Also, I see Tom dropped the link to our next session in there. It's going to be Thursday, March 4th. We're going to be talking about how to convert land clients into cruise clients, which is something that we've been asked to do by a lot of advisors on these calls. So if you want to register for that one, again, it'll be March 2nd. My apologies. You can register for there on that link now. All right. Now, before we get to our travel advisor today, I'm very happy to welcome our sponsor, Lisa Bain, the VP of Sales North America for Lindblad Expeditions National Geographic.
Morning, Dan. How are you?
Morning. Good. How are you?
I'm great. And thank you so much for having us. I am really excited today to be here for this master series, but to have Amanda Klimak with us is really exciting. Amanda is such a voice for travel advisors throughout the United States as a member of ASTA, and she is such a strong voice in supporting advisors. So to have her join us today for this particular subject on expedition is really exciting. She's also, and many people probably don't know this, she's a nationally ranked pinball player. So watch out, y'all, if you play a little pinball, this woman's coming to get you. But I did want to kind of give a quick overview of who Lindblad Expeditions is. I see some familiar faces here today, but some that are new, probably to expedition. Lindblad Expeditions, National Geographic, we were the very first small ship expedition company in the world. Think about that, 1966. Very first company to take guests to Antarctica. The following year, the very first company to take guests to the Galapagos Islands. So this is a type of travel that really isn't that old. And it was kind of that thought behind it from Lars-Erik Lindblad and from Sven Lindblad to tie in that safari feel, right? The morning game drive, the afternoon game drive, coming back, sitting in the round, talking about your experiences. So as you think about expedition travel, think about, the kind of clients that really enjoy that immersive educational opportunity to learn, to be a part of the experience. And I hope you'll take a moment. I know that Tom is going to share with you our training platform, which is Expedition 360. It's super quick. It's about 2.5 hours long. Please go ahead, sign up, get that training done. It is a brilliant base for learning about Lindblad Expeditions, where we go, what we do, and for sharing the world. But I'm so excited to hear Amanda, and I can't thank you enough, Dan, for letting us be a part of today.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you for the introduction to Lindblad and also the introduction to Amanda. We're very excited to talk to Amanda today. Again, like you mentioned, Amanda is one of the bigger voices in the travel industry. She's the co-owner of Largay Travel and the president and co-owner of Largay Travel, and Please Go Away Fueled by Largay Travel. She's also the former chairperson for the Virtuoso Member Advisory Board, and she currently sits on the ASTA Corporate Advisory Council. Like you mentioned, she's here to talk about expedition cruising, and we're very excited to have her. But welcome, Amanda, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and I see so many of my friends in the participant list and people that I really admire in this segment of the business. So I hope I do you proud, all of you.
Yeah, I mean, I know I said a little bit about your history, but I was hoping you could just sort of give us a short introduction about you, about your agency, and your career in the industry.
Yeah. So, I mean, I joined the industry when I was a wee 5 years old. That was 32 years ago. And, I've just really enjoyed the industry and I've enjoyed working with advisors. Here at Largay, we're a bigger team. We have about 140 independent partners. We call them business partners. And we're really big on collaboration. So a lot of people get to know me through different boards and collaboration teams and things like that, because I truly believe the advisor community is the best way for people to book travel. And I believe that from my core, and I want to be able to say to my children, this is a good career. You can make money in this career and you can love what you do. So it's been a real passion project for me and something I've just loved learning from everyone else as I go.
Yeah, it's always incredible to hear that kind of enthusiasm and optimism about the industry. And I know it's not just you. I've heard it from so many advisors, especially nowadays. So it's really, I love kicking off this session with that kind of sentiment. But I know today's topics, exhibition cruising. I was curious for those of you who maybe not familiar with you, for those of the advisors on the call who maybe not be familiar with you, Amanda, could you tell us a little bit about how long you've been selling expedition cruises for?
Yeah, well, as a child, I grew up going to like Wildwood, New Jersey, and, all of these places in the United States. We did not travel internationally. So once I got the opportunity to travel internationally, I went full on. High school, I went to Russia. And so that was my first international trip ever as an exchange student. And so I got the bug early on. And so once I got into the industry and I started doing, your regular standard cruising, all inclusives, things like that, I started to get more curious about the world. So in 2007, I took my first expedition type of trip to Africa, and I really got the bug at that point. I love animals. I love nature. I love being outside, love being active. And so for me, it was just a natural fit. And because I was super passionate about it, it was a really easy thing for me to learn about because I loved it. So it's been a long road, but I've gotten to do some really amazing things because of that focus.
Yeah, and I know you said 2007, or you said, Amanda, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's been, so how many expedition trips? I'm sure it might be hard to count. So like in the ballpark, maybe how many have you done since you took that first one in 2007?
Probably 25, I would say. I mean, that was my first safari. I've been back to Africa 13 times.
Wow.
I've been to Galapagos, to Antarctica just recently, Asia, different parts of Asia, and have really started to explore. And I've got a few more places. It's funny that for me, wildlife is a big thing. And that's a huge part of my expedition. So my biggest thing right now is I want to see a walrus. So
Okay.
I kind of go for the animal I'm looking for. And whether it's a polar bear, a walrus, a narwhal, whatever it may be, that's what drives me. But it's that curiosity and learning that I just absolutely love when I go on a trip. You'll never see me sitting on a beach. And not that there's anything wrong with that. That's perfect for the perfect advisors and clients, but just not my bag.
So I know we want to talk about how to qualify clients, how to find clients, things like that. But I'm just curious, Amanda, because I know a lot of the advisors on the call will have the same sentiments as you. How important is it having these personal experiences, these firsthand experiences in the destinations that you're going to be selling, especially considering they're a somewhat niche product or niche destination?
Yeah. I mean, the best education you could get is going there in person, but don't let that kind of deter you from actually selling adventure travel and expedition travel, because you have this wealth of information, whether it be Facebook boards, like Lindblad has a Facebook board. You can learn from other advisors there. You could take the Expedition 360 class. You could do a lot of learning. And then your sales reps are always there to support you. So many of the expedition companies that we work with are more than happy to get on the phone with clients, help you qualify them, make sure that it's the right product for them. And the great part is when you do that three-way call, you're able to learn as you go as well. The other thing is a lot of the trips that I take, I either host a group and invite people with me so I can get my travel. I don't have to necessarily pay for the trip, or I invest in my education. So some of the trips that I take, yes, there's fam trips, and with this type of travel, sometimes it can be hard because there's not a lot of space on some of these ships. So the fams are few and far between, but it is worth the investment because this is a really profitable segment of the business.
Yeah. So that's where I want to start. I know we launched a poll. I'm just curious to sort of see what people's experience on the call are with expedition vacations, expedition cruises too. So we're hoping you can answer that. But I want to start there, Amanda. I mean, we heard coming out of the pandemic that there's going to be this rush to bucket list destinations because people particularly felt robbed of 2 years of being unable to do that. They've had a lot of time to dream about travel and dream about what they want to accomplish in their travels.
Yep.
But we're 3 years post-pandemic now. I mean, I'm curious, how strong is the expedition cruise market for you and for your clients? Does it feel like the demand is still there and as high as it was even a year ago?
It's huge. I mean, this is one of those segments of the business that you can't really book it yourself. I mean, you can, but there's so much you need to know about the trips themselves that clients do want someone there to handhold and to just help them through the preparation, what to pack, what they need to go, what they don't need to go. So for us, expedition has really boomed. And what's great about the industry is that once you get a client onto an expedition cruise, chances are they're going to want more. So maybe Antarctica might be a one and done for some people, although I will go back, absolutely. But, you can then send them to the Arctic. You can send them to Alaska, Galapagos. There's so many different destinations that these companies work with, are going, that there's always something. And so I think it's one of those type of sales that you're connecting with your client on such a deep level, and they're so appreciative that you've given them such a robust vacation, a vacation where they can connect in a different way with their family, that I think it really does also enhance the advisor-client relationship, because they learn that, wow, this was something they recommended and it's a really good idea. And we had a great time. Where to next?
Yeah.
So it's tough to go back once you've been over. Let's just say it's like first class. Once you turn left, you don't ever want to turn right again.
Yeah. Yeah. So the results of the poll, 80% of attendees today have not been on an expedition sailing or expedition experience. So I think it's a good opportunity for suppliers to know about that. But we're here to talk about clients, which I know is why all the advisors joined today.
Yep.
So we talked about sort of the market's very strong, Amanda. I'm just curious. I mean, where do your clients typically come from? I mean, are they, you mentioned how much travel you do. Are they seeing your travel on social media and coming to you as an expert? Are they finding you on the internet? Are they finding you through word of mouth? I mean, where do you typically sort of garner clients for these kind of vacations?
It can really be anywhere. I mean, a lot of people know that that's the kind of travel I do. So they're going to come to me just because they see posts and things like that. But I think it's important for advisors to know that if a client comes to you and, they've been to the Caribbean multiple times, or they've been to destinations and their kids play sports and that they're active, or they're just a really curious person, they're well educated, and that they would be interested in learning, that's a great time to make the suggestion, because they may not even think that they'd be somebody suited to go on the trip. And what I love is the expeditions that I've been on, whether it be Galapagos, Antarctica, Costa Rica off the coast, there's people of all ages.
Okay.
And being curious, wanting to learn, comes in every way, shape, and form. And so, you have to remember that just because somebody, may be mobility challenged or may not even think it's possible, it is possible. And so when I was in Antarctica, I had a group of 25 3 total. And what was great about that was they ranged in age from, 19 all the way up into their 80s. And, we had multi-generational families there. And, maybe the great grandparents didn't get off the ship every day because they couldn't go on the Zodiac, but just enjoying the experience with their family when their family came back on the ship and talked about it was absolutely mind-blowing. And so I think we have to remember that it is an option. And this year is going to be a really hard year for availability. So taking people to Italy, taking people to some of those destinations that they normally would go, prices are high. It's going to be busy. And I think we need to remember that sometimes think outside of the box and say, you know what, I'm just going to suggest something a little different to you. I don't know if you're interested, but I just want to throw it out there because I think you might really like it.
Yeah.
And when they do decide to do that, they will thank you a million times over. And then they become a repeat customer by doing that.
Yeah, that is a great point because I know, again, I keep calling these niche vacations. I know for a lot of people they are niche, but the market does seem to be smaller, even though it is growing than, like you mentioned, the trips to Italy, things like that. When you suggest an expedition sailing to a new client or a client who hasn't experienced yet, are there any common questions or any hangups that they have that come to you? Any misconceptions that you sort of need to help them out with?
Yeah, I mean, I ask a lot of questions about what they like to do, how they like to travel, what they've done in the past. So I'm getting a full understanding of, if somebody says they love staying in a big casino hotel and they love the nightlife and things like that, they might not be somebody that would have even thought of an expedition, but we have to talk about those things if I'm going to make the suggestion. And sometimes they don't even realize, and they're like, you know what, I never really thought of that, but my kids are getting a little older and it might be a neat idea. So you want to ask them lots of probing questions and then really know the product. There are ships of all shapes and sizes doing expedition right now. And Lindblad alone has ships that are 150 people and they have ships that are 60 people. And so you want to know the different amenities on board. You want to know what the client is comfortable with. You want to know, and you really want to dive in deeper when you're asking those questions. But you don't have to worry as well, because you could say, I want to suggest this to you possibly and see if it might be something of interest. And then call your sales rep and say, hey, Lisa, can you get on a 3-way call and let's just talk to this family? Because what I found is the sales reps from those expedition companies, just as much as we don't want to put the wrong client on their ships, they don't want the wrong client on their ship. So a lot of times when I have the conversation, if Lisa feels that, this is not a good fit for us, she will say it. And, you have to know the different products and things like that, but there are easy ways to start off with the suggestions and then just learn as you go. And it comes pretty easy after a while.
Yeah, that's where I want to start. I want to start with qualifying clients and sort of helping advisors getting a sense of the market. But we have a question from a guest attendee, Amanda.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting question here. The guest says they're not sure if they could even define an expedition sailing. They said no to the poll question, but they've been to a number of places that you've mentioned when you talked about your past experiences. I mean, would you have your definition in your head of what expedition sailing really is?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the ships are very similar to what you might sail in other parts of the world, but the expedition sailing to me is all about the journey. The vessel, the ship itself is just the way that gets you from point A to point B. Now, different ships are different sizes, offer different amenities. The ship I was just on, the Endurance, she had a beautiful spa and all of the bells and whistles, but I've also been on the Seabird, which doesn't have televisions. We had twin beds and, it's a different experience. So, I mean, expedition, I think, in my opinion, is more about the journey itself. It's about the destination, about the learning. That's really what the journey is about. And the vessel is just part of the transportation that gets you to and fro kind of thing. But having scientists on board that are doing studies, naturalists who are working with you all day, whether it be one that, you know, specializes in krill and one specializes in ice and one is whales and one, you know, it can be a really good learning experience. So that's my definition. I don't know if Lisa has a different definition.
No, I think that's a great point to start off on, and we have some advisors sort of agreeing with you in the chat too. And
Yep.
it is nice to get a sense of what people, because you are right that I see all these new products come out from all these incredible cruise lines, and you can very much travel in luxury to a remote destination. So you're completely right. All right, so let's start with talking to clients about these potential trips too. You mentioned how important it is to ask the right questions, Amanda. Would you be able to share some of those right questions with us, or maybe even right questions, but what information is important to get from a client in those first few conversations in order to be able to place them with the right product?
I think asking them what they've done in the past. Somebody who likes boutique hotels, you know, being on a smaller ship would be very comfortable with that for them. If they're used to bigger hotels and more bells and whistles, or they've been on large cruises in the past, you may have to ask a lot more questions. If there's certain people that have limitations, whether it be mobility issues or seasickness, things like that, you want to be curious about that. But then you really want to get into what is the goal of your trip? Is it reconnecting with your family? Is it taking time disconnected from the rest of the world? And then you have to really start to kind of let the conversation guide you with your suggestions, because, you know, getting there are different ways you can do certain things, like the Arctic. You know, if you go to the Arctic or Greenland and you're on a ship with 700 or 800 people, and you go into a small village that maybe has 100 residents, it's kind of like a swarm of people getting on, you know, onto shore. Whereas when you're there and there's 60 passengers or 100 passengers, it's a completely different feel in how you're also relating to the, you know, indigenous people of that area. So again, I know that we have a lot of ships. I mean, if you look at what was happening 5-10 years ago in Antarctica, we had 5 to 10 ships. When I was just there, there was almost 70 ships down in the Antarctic region. And so again, you really want to ask those probing questions, and that'll help you pick the right ship and the right provider. And, you know, not that one is better than the other, because there are some fabulous providers that are going to these areas now that are taking people to the Arctic or Indonesia, Japan. But again, it's about learning about the guests, learning about what they're interested in, what they hope to achieve on the trip. If there's anything specific they want to do, like kayaking, or I want to make sure I, you know, do some cross-country skiing, or I want to make sure I see a polar bear, where do I go so that I make sure I get that experience? Then you want to, as you talk through it, kind of learn about that. And one of the other things that I try to do is not only talk to one person who calls me, but I like to see if I can talk to everyone in the family that's traveling or in the travel group. And, you know, see if I can pull from the kids. Have you ever seen a whale? Have you, you know, do you have an interest? Because there are kids programs. And then the other thing that's starting to be really popular is a lot of these ships even have solo cabins. And so when you're on an expedition in a solo cabin, it's a different feel when you're on the ship, because you're part of a community of curious travelers. So, you know, we had some single travelers with us in our group, but there was a lot of other people we met on board, single women especially, where I just thought, wow, how amazing that they've been on trips like this and they feel so comfortable in these communities. So it is something that if you have someone who is even solo, it's a great thing to look at, because they love the activity, being part of something. And it is, you know, just that, as our guest said, expedition is more immersive, and it really is.
Yeah, that is terrific, because I've heard other advisors tell me, ask about past trips. It's important to know about what they liked and what they disliked about past vacations before. But you just put it very plainly about asking what a client wants to achieve from a vacation, and then what they just want out of their trip. And I think that's are really, it seems like such a simple place to start, but I imagine it does provide you with a lot of details and a lot of knowledge you need to be able to place the client correctly.
Yes. And you can get so much information out of a client when you're having that conversation on a deeper level, because a lot of times when you start to ask questions and maybe you ask one of the kids about whales, they say, oh my God, but I've also always wanted to see penguins. And oh my gosh. And you're almost getting that bucket list in their profile so that I know when they return from one trip, guess what? I'm going to be sending them something else and saying, hey, really thought you might be interested in this as a next trip, or maybe we should plan this for 2025 after graduation. So it allows you to kind of make that deeper connection with the clients as well when you start to have that deeper conversation.
Yeah, so sort of planning, making a 5-year plan. We've heard that before too, a five-year plan, or however many years, about, again, going to, I think what you said has sort of struck me as thinking about your trips as accomplishing something or achieving something.
Yes.
It seems to be an interesting way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so all right, so we have a question. I'm going to hold off on that one, but I know you mentioned clients can be very, very different, and there's so many different products now too.
Mhm.
But are there any general, like, sort of starter destinations that first-time expedition clients want to come to? Because personally, I have yet to be on an expedition vacation, and it sometimes seems daunting when I can see the amount of choices. And I
Yes.
imagine first-timers might have that same feeling as well.
Yes. Well, and there's some destinations that are just automatically come on people's bucket list, Africa being one of them. And, once somebody goes to Africa, they will be looking at what is my next destination and expedition, as long as it goes well, which 9 times out of 10, it's going to go fabulously well. So I always think, like, once you've done Africa, Galapagos is another great fit. Or once you've done Alaska, suggesting Galapagos, or suggesting Baja California, even to see whales or things like that. Because if they really enjoyed whale watching when they were in Alaska, or seeing bears, then that might be a logical kind of thing. I think what you want to be careful of is, like, diving in, that somebody who's gone all inclusive or has done, cruising before, and saying, let's do Komodo, or let's do Indonesia. You may be jumping the gun there. They may have seen something and it may have interested them, and possibly they would want to go, but there is kind of a progression that takes place usually as you work with a client and as they start to take the expeditions and just get their feet wet. There's some really great destinations like Galapagos where, the seas are generally a little bit calmer. They're off the ship every day on islands. The ships are really comfortable. They get some really good education. The animals are plentiful. The marine life is fantastic. And it's up close and personal. So, those are some really great destinations to start with. And then as people kind of are curious about the rest of the world, they'll start to ask. And, companies like Lindblad, they keep in contact with your clients afterwards. And the great thing is, when your client goes and books again, they bring it back to the advisor. So their commitment to us is really strong. And so I always look at my partners that, knowing that somebody goes on, say, a bike trip here, chances are, if it goes well, they're going to want to go on another bike trip. So I'm always looking at, what are the companies that really support us as advisors, that if I introduce them to the company, they are there. I see the question about the consortiums, and Lindblad does work with the different consortiums as well.
Yeah, and so I that's that same guest, Amanda, who I wanted to ask the previous question. And I guess the question is, again, correlation between being able to move guests more easily, the guests who enjoy escorted tours or small group travel, or do they seem like a natural fit for expedition travel?
They may be, yeah. And I think it depends on what kind of escorted tours they're used to taking. History lovers or architecture lovers, it may be a little bit different from what they're used to doing. But people who love to be taken care of from start to finish and not have to do a lot of thought in their travel, most of the expedition companies, Lindblad, National Geographic, they really do guide you through. So they're getting you the right gear. They're telling you what to pack. They're helping you along the way. And then it's pretty seamless once you're on the trip itself, as far as how they do the logistics. Now, what you want to keep in mind is when you go on an expedition, you are going on an expedition. What's fabulous about that when you're on an expedition vessel is that as the wildlife and the terrain changes, or the weather or whatever, they are able to change and pivot in a way that most of the larger cruise lines are not able to pivot. So we were sitting at, we had come down in the evening one night to have our evening kind of wrap up of what happened during the day and what was happening the next day. And we're sitting in the lounge, and all of a sudden you hear the captain on the speaker say, ladies and gentlemen, there is a pod of killer whales off the bow of the ship. And it was like everyone rose and ran to the front of the ship. You would have thought the ship tipped over, but they didn't care. It was like, we have wildlife here. We are going to see the wildlife. We are, whether dinner is late and cold, they didn't care. They knew that people were there to have an expedition. You could have stayed seated. They didn't care, but it was, it was neat to see how everyone's curiosity and just love of nature, it was almost infectious. And I think it's that type of excitement and that closeness that you feel when you're on one of these journeys that is what really gets you jived and excited, and keeps you coming back. And I think that's what sells it over and over and over, because you don't necessarily get that vibe. And especially the smaller ships, when you're in Antarctica, you can only have 100 people go on land at once. Now, if you have 700 people on a ship, you have to go in rounds, and not everybody may get off of the ship, on any given day. And so again, you want to look at the vessel size, what kind of a vessel it is. Is it an ice cutter? When we were down in Antarctica, the ship, because it was an ice class ship, was able to sail far south, or south, because you just keep going south, from where a lot of the other ships were up on the peninsula. And so, you want to take those things into account, because it can affect your experience, especially there was bad weather here, we're going to go there. And the smaller ships are able to do that in a way that the larger ships don't necessarily get to do.
Yeah, it does seem that your clients, or I guess clients who will enjoy this kind of cruising, they do have to have sort of an attitude that they're going to roll with the punches if things do go wrong, because I imagine a number of things can go wrong when you're in more dangerous waters or harder to reach places. But it also seems like you're talking about, Amanda, like I could just sense it in your voice and the way you were talking about it, like this sense of adventure too is evident all with everyone who goes on these kind of sailings, which is something you wouldn't get on a huge ship sailing, just because there's so many people on board and they all want different things out of the vacation. So I imagine it does feel, you do get a different feeling when you're on these cruises as opposed to a bigger ship cruise.
Yeah, you're all on an adventure together, and it is something where you get that camaraderie. And that's why I say, like, solo travelers don't have to worry about feeling included on board. And it is something where somebody could come to me and say, what, I want to get away, and I was thinking about going to, a wellness spa or something like this. And it's one of those things where you could say, have you ever thought of taking an expedition? And they'll say, well, what is that? It's something that you can go on and learn all about the area, the wildlife. Here are the destinations that might interest you. And again, it's just taking the time to plant the seed. They may not necessarily take it this time. They may say, oh, I don't have the budget this year, or I don't have the time to get away. But when you plant that seed, I had planned my trip 3 years out. I rescheduled twice because of COVID. And, by the time my group got on board, it was so exciting. And so, now I've planned another group for next year. We're going to do the Arctic, so I can see my walrus, because I want to see a tooth walker, as they're called. Okay. So we're going to try something new. And, once you get a core group of people that love to travel and are also curious, it can be really, really profitable when you get going with that too.
Yeah, we've done some of these sessions on groups too. I know that a lot of advisors build business around groups, so that is a great point to make. One thing I want to ask you, Amanda, because you seem to very much have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in this market, is you mentioned Baja California, the Galapagos, the Arctic. Is there any new destination, or maybe not new destination, but is there any destination that's come onto the market that's taking people by storm, or is getting more interest than other destinations? And anything new in the market that you can tell us about that might help advisors who are now going to go talk to their clients about these kind of vacations?
Yeah, some of the places that are starting to really get popular: Indonesia, Borneo, you could see orangutans, Komodo, and that area of the world. As Asia starts to reopen, that'll get really popular. Also the Kimberley, which is Northern Australia, another area that is just really fascinating. And a lot of people, don't even consider a cruise necessarily when they're planning something to Australia, but it can be a really nice add-on and add something completely different. Papua New Guinea and some of these destinations, they're not the destination you necessarily would want to be on land, because it is about getting to the different islands and areas and being able to explore. But again, you want to be there with a ship that's small enough that when you go in, you can interact with people at a deeper level and, just not overwhelm certain parts of the world, especially those that are a little bit more unique. But I'm going to be, doing my ice bear trip next year. And I just love the polar bears and things like that. So going up to Svalbard and, doing some of those regions. And now with some of the ships, the Northern Passage is becoming, unfortunately, due to climate change, becoming more accessible for people who want to do up over the polar cap.
Okay. Yeah, there seems, like you mentioned, there seems to be just a ton of options, a ton
Mhm.
of suppliers coming to the market now, and a ton of destinations, which does seem like it would make a travel advisor's job more difficult, but it would also make the job of a client who maybe he or she thinks they're going to be able to do this on their own. That makes that task more difficult too. So that's what I want to ask about next. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about it in the beginning of the call, Amanda, but when we were prepping for this the other day, you mentioned uh you mentioned like sort of job security you have with this kind of niche, that it
Yeah.
does seem like something you're gonna need advice with, you're going to need an expert for. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that too. I mean, how big of a part of a business is expedition cruising for you? And I mean, what do you hear from your clients when you do successfully send them on these kind of vacations?
It's a huge segment of our business. And when I talk about job security, no, this is not the kind of thing that people feel comfortable necessarily booking online, going to Costco. No offense to anybody from Costco, but they want to have somebody who has taken the time to study, who knows the destinations or has an idea or knows the people who do know. So, my suggestion is that it is such a lucrative business because, again, remember, most of the ships are all inclusive as far as your shore excursions are part of the trip itself, which means those are commissionable. It also means that, start to finish, they're there to help. And then you're adding on, helping them with the air, with the entry requirements, things like that as well. So the repeat factor with that type of travel is huge. And you won't see as much discounting and, that kind of that you see in some other segments of our business. And I think it really is an area where expertise rules, and having the right people to work with so that if something goes wrong, you have someone to help. And that's our job. And again, with Expedition, my business partner, Paul, was trying to go to Antarctica just a week or two after I was. He was doing the flight over and his flight was canceled due to the weather. And, being able to help someone pivot if something changes or goes wrong or, whatever. As an advisor, guess what? You're their hero. And once you help somebody, you guys all know, once you help somebody out of a difficult situation, you are their best friend for life. They so appreciate you and what you do. And, it's a really great segment. And it's fun. If you love it, it even becomes more fun. So it's a great, fun segment to sell.
Again, one thing you mentioned, Amanda, you mentioned repeat factor. And when we were talking the other day, that surprised me that you said this is a high repeat factor too, because my perception, again, is it's probably incorrect talking to you, is that once you sort of make that check on your bucket list, you're not going back. But you told me I was wrong, that you do have a fairly high repeat factor for this kind of cruising.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know how many different voyages and destinations that Lindblad has, or a lot of the other providers, but it's in the hundreds. So I think you could keep somebody very busy for the pretty much the part of their life. And, I think what we often don't talk to with people is ask them, what is on your bucket list? I mean, most of us that are my age or older grew up reading National Geographic. We grew up watching the show on Sunday night with the animals and, National Geographic, and we all know that, right? So, I mean, even for me, when I was a young girl, my mom took me to see King Tut at the Metropolitan Museum of Art when he was traveling there on tour. And that was in the late 80s or late 70s. And I got to see King Tut in Egypt in his tomb where he was lying just this past year. And so, we have to remember that everyone grew up dreaming about someplace, whether it be going to the moon, whether it be going to the South Pole, the North Pole, Alaska, seeing bears. We all grew up with this. And so unless you take the time to really ask people, like, what is your bucket list and dream? What is your dream of, where are the places you really want to go? And then, how much do you allocate of your annual income as an investment into your most valuable non-renewable asset, your free time? And I think most people, they go into their trip thinking, what's the cheapest I can get it for? Whereas you need to get them to think differently. I am making an investment into my relationships with my family, into my life and my pleasure. We spend time planning our estate. We plan our death. We plan retirement. And yet we don't plan our free time really well, most of us. And so, getting them to think a little bit different is really important. And this kind of travel, when you dig into those bucket lists, you find out that there are places that they've always dreamed of going. And a lot of time it's an expedition. I was going to say an exhibition. That's a whole different segment of business.
Amanda, you tell those stories about what you dreamed of doing, and I can think of seeing a movie called Master and Commander and seeing them go to the Galapagos when it was undisturbed, and that's on my bucket list simply for that reason. So you're right. People do sort of connect with cultural experiences, with, literature, movies, things like that. So it is something I think maybe advisors might overlook too.
I took my son for his 21st birthday to the Galapagos. And my son, 21 years old, his choice was to travel with me for his birthday. And, it's those kind of things that when you can connect with the people you love in a way that is so deep and so enriching, and that you can talk about, how many of our kids are sitting, on their iPads and we complain, oh, they're always on the computer. Get them out into nature, get them out on an expedition, and you'll see them light up, and in a way that, and they become global citizens as they're learning about these destinations and cultures and all of that. As you could tell, I don't like this kind of travel.
So we have less than 10 minutes left, or 10 minutes or so. If anyone else has any questions for Amanda, please drop them in the chat. I have two more for you, Amanda, but if there's any other questions or comments, we'd love to pass them along. I see some very nice comments too in the chat.
Yep.
Including one from Claire, who just says just so many nuggets to take away. But any questions, I'm sure we can help you out with that. But Amanda, I do want to leave everyone with some advice on how to find some clients, because I like the poll. We did the poll in the beginning, so a lot of advisors aren't experienced this firsthand. Maybe they don't have experience booking this firsthand. Maybe they don't think they have clients that necessarily are a good fit yet. Any advice for sort of building this into your clientele, for finding people who might like these kind of trips?
Yeah. The first thing I would do is take a training class like the Expedition 360, post it on social media, ask them for collateral, maybe some postcards, and handwrite. I just took this amazing class and I'm so excited about the stuff I learned. I think these trips might be for you. There is video, there is photographs, there is all sorts of information. Make a social media campaign based around this. March is wilderness year, expedition month. And, ask those around you who are willing to give you what you need. And I say that as sales reps, they are dying to help you with your marketing, getting the news out there, and just start talking about it. Posting that you went to a webinar today and it was so exciting. We were all discussing how we can work with clients on expeditions and having deep, meaningful trips. And I think that is the best way to get the information out. And then don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call people who you think might be good candidates for it. And just say, hey, we haven't talked in a while. I just wanted to tell you, I took this amazing class and I just really thought of you. And I think it might be something you're interested in. You'll be surprised that if you make 10 or 20 phone calls, you might get one or two. And that may be one or two today that are interested, but you'll see that down the road, they will start to surface as you talk more about it. And even make a commitment that everybody you talk to, you're going to say, hey, had you ever thought about an expedition? See what happens. You'll be surprised. People are afraid of what they don't know. And when you bring it up and talk about it, it becomes accessible to them. And they will all, most of the time be curious and ask you what you're talking about. And it just plants the seed.
And then I also want to ask, again, we spoke about how it's very difficult to book this kind of travel on your own. But at the same time, I imagine there are certain things that clients want or need out of their relationship with you, Amanda. Could you talk a little bit about that? I mean, why do you think, aside from sort of the mountain of information that seems very difficult to navigate through, why do you think your clients choose to book through you rather than book direct with the supplier?
Well, I think because I'm excited about it and passionate about it, and I've taken the time to educate myself. I know the right people to call who can help me. And it's funny because as you were saying, like, I know this is a really difficult segment to sell. You know what's difficult, Dan? Disney. Like, honestly, like you want to talk about a product that has a million moving parts. That's difficult to sell. So if you, take the time to learn a few bits about it, maybe start with Alaska. Let's look at what the expedition cruises are up in Alaska, or let's just look at Galapagos. You can take it with little chunks, learn as you go, and just work with those things along the way. But you know what? It's not as hard as people think, and it's not as scary because the companies who do it really, really well. And don't think you have to learn every company. Start with one. Maybe get two that you have two price ranges. Maybe get, a few destinations under your belt. So take it like little bites at a time, and it will start to flow. And you'll learn as you book. Is the biggest thing.
You mentioned pricing. I'm curious, do you ever get the feeling that this is cost prohibitive for some of your clients? Because I know you mentioned it's all inclusive. I mean, that price they're presented with sometimes can maybe be a little overwhelming, but do you ever get that perception that maybe is a hang up for some of your potential clients?
You know what? They perceive it as a hang up, but what they don't realize is when you go, say, to Alaska and you're on a large ship, you, of course, get your cabin. You want to have a balcony. You maybe want a suite. You're going to have to pay for your alcohol. You're going to have to pay for your shore excursions. By the time you add that up, you could have paid for a small ship with, all inclusive. And maybe it's a little bit more, or it's, slightly more. But I think when you actually sit down and put pen to paper, you'll find that the experience itself is a lot fuller, and it's not that far off on the price. But you just have to get the client to understand you're not comparing apples to apples. You're like apples, bananas. And you're also going to see a lot more wildlife up close because they can pivot these ships, these small ships, on a dime. You're not turning around one of the big guys to go back and look at a pot of whales. Yeah. But one of these ships, they spin it around, get the kayaks off the ship, and off you go. So, it's a different experience, but I think price, yes, it is more expensive, but when you really break down what's included, it's not as big of an issue as you think. And it's worth it. I see that in here from Cynthia.
Yeah. I was just going to bring that up. But that we're going to wrap up, Amanda. I know we're running out of time. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I really had so much fun talking to you about this.
You're
I'll give you a couple minutes to see if there's anything else you want to add, but thank you so much for sort of lending us your time and expertise today. We really do appreciate it, and hopefully everyone enjoyed this as much as I did.
Thanks, Dan. And I just want to add, you guys have some great support. There's a lot of people on here that I know are experts in this type of travel as well. Ask your friends. People will share. You know, we're a community. We're all here. We are not competing with one another. There is a whole plethora of people who haven't discovered us or haven't used us in years. And I think, you know, sharing, learning from each other, going on Facebook chat boards. You know, I'm in the private Lindblad Facebook group, and we get so much good information from each other there. And I just really encourage you all to get out there and learn and see if this is your passion. And if it's not, find your other passion, because there are a lot we can sell. And if you're passionate about what you sell, it will come through a million times over.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you to Lisa and Lindblad and National Geographic too for your time. And most of all, thanks to all the advisors who came on today. Again, I really learned a lot. I'm going to start referring to vacations as investments, like you said, Amanda, because I think that's the best way to look at it.
Yeah.
But again, I really do appreciate everyone coming on today. Hope you have a great rest of your week, great weekend. Enjoy the Super Bowl, and then hopefully we'll see you all very soon.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.